Welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is a webinar that's mainly aimed at lawyers. We're meeting in pretty historic times, I think, at least. I suspect that in modern history we've never seen such a major and sudden change in our day-to-day life. As the one we've seen now. I think even in wartime, wars have generally been geographically limited, or there's been a kind of revving up period prior to that war that's allowed people to take steps to mitigate the consequences of that, whereas the COVID pandemic took everybody pretty much by surprise. It was incredibly rapid, incredibly deep, and affected our lives very, very materially. We're not going to talk about all of that today, obviously. The aim of this webinar is to have a group of lawyers discuss how the global pandemic has affected their practice and their working environment in general. I'll just first of all introduce today's panelists. And once I've done that, I will kick off the discussion between everybody with a number of questions. I'm just going to mute everybody, or if Nirit, you could mute everyone just so we don't get any background noise. And obviously, if anybody has any questions that they want to ask the panelists as well, feel free to use your chat button and write a question, and hopefully we'll have time towards the end of the session to deal with those questions as well. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the panelists. We have here today my partner Simon Weintraub from Yigal Aronon and Co in Israel. We have Adam Rose, a partner from Mishkon Dorea in the UK, and Brendan Kelly, a partner at Baker McKenzie, who is working out of Shanghai. So I'm going to turn to each of you just to give a brief introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, and I think it would be probably interesting to hear a short summary of what the rules and regulations are in your jurisdiction that relate to your ability to come to work, not to come to work, and what steps you have to take in the workplace right now. So we'll start with you, Adam.
Adrian, thank you, and hello. So as you said, I'm based in London. At the sort of macro level, the UK is theoretically relatively open. There have been various local lockdowns where there have been spikes in recurrence of COVID, but the big cities are pretty empty. So our office is right in the centre of London, and it is partly reopened. And no one is around really. You come out of the front door, and whereas normally there are just hundreds of people and cars going around, it is pretty quiet. It's and it's not just because it's mid-August, because people aren't really going away on holiday at the moment, because there are various rules and regulations not really being applied, I've got to say, but various rules and regulations about going into quarantine on return from 20-odd European destinations, various countries like yours that we can't get into in the first place, so we don't need to worry about being locked down when we get back. So it's a really strange, quiet environment. There was a total lockdown. We shut our office. Everyone was sent home to find a desk at which to work from home. That seems to have worked pretty well, and we are slowly, I guess the mood music is changing from a do not come in to, if you really have to come in, we've opened up some space, to it'd be quite nice to see you every now and again, to you're really welcome to come back. And that sort of mood music is encouraging people back into the office. So I have been in twice since March the 16th, last Monday and last Thursday, and I'm going in tomorrow to see if a Wednesday is busier than a Monday or a Thursday. it's not sort of affecting our work as such, it's affecting the way we're working. And I guess we'll come on to some of that later. So I'll stop here unless there's anything in particular you want me to say, Adrian.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Adam. Brendan, would you like to say a few words? Oh, I've just muted you. There we go. No?
Yeah, no, I think I should be unmuted now. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Yeah, I am based in Shanghai. I've lived in China since 2001. I was in Beijing initially and then Shanghai for the last about 14 years. It's been a very strange time for us, just like everyone. The primary difference for us is that we've kind of experienced it sort of twice because my family and I, we initially, departed from China. We had been through the SARS epidemic, which was very different, by the way, much more localized, obviously, but also came to an end in a much more compact period of time. But we initially departed from China with the theory being that I was going to be the one member of the Baker McKenzie team in China and to some extent in the region that was going to be able to see clients during the window of time, because the expectation was to some extent it would remain in China or sort of greater China. And so that was sort of the theory. And the end result of that is I've ended up being stuck in the US for almost 6 months after having lived in China, never having exited more than maybe 4 or 5 weeks at a go in a summer. I've been unable to return to China, but I'm literally working Asia hours. I work every night on the West Coast in the United States at a place we have here that we own. We were fortunate enough to have bought in November of last year. But I work every night from about 7 p.m. to about 2 in the morning just to try to stay on an Asia schedule, not inconvenience others. But we, in China, what we've sort of experienced is that, in the early days, China had a very, very hard lockdown, and people were truly, literally not able to cross the border of their door, their apartment or their respective dwelling, and that was enforced in a very, very, very rigorous manner. So the initial part of it felt kind of comparatively draconian and very intense. But the result of that, I suppose, and not to get into sort of politics or science or whatever, but the net result of that, actually, Shanghai now is very much open. So I've got, and maybe the best example of that is what I'm hearing from my team, is that, while people wear masks on their commute to work, even when they're in the office, they're not really wearing masks anymore while they're in the office itself, a high degree of comfort. And to me, as a big, I really enjoy basketball, and it says a lot to me when people are playing pickup basketball, because the physical contact there, fluid, sweat, etc. And people are doing that and they're not wearing masks or doing anything sort of strange. It's just that people go out around with effectively a QR code, and that QR code sort of shows that you're green. And what that means is that you sort of, you don't have any negative tests that have showed up on the system. But also, perhaps more importantly, the idea is that you install this app, and the idea is that then they can see whether or not you've departed and gone somewhere, so that way when you come back, you kind of got to go through that process. So there's a number of factors and challenges in terms of getting yourself back on the clean side of things, in terms of being able to move around in Shanghai. But once you do, restaurants, businesses, offices are really open up in a very, very real way. Our Beijing office has had a slightly different experience. They've had a little bit of a flare up over the last couple of weeks, and that's resulted in a little bit more flexible work arrangements so that people have the ability to kind of, select what works best for them. But Shanghai has been very much, people have been working in kind of a normal way, commuting to the office, etc. Beijing's a little different. And what we've seen, and we can come to it later if people are interested, I do spend a lot of time with our other offices in the region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam. And you've had some different experiences. We've learned some interesting different things, and we'll talk about that later in terms of what it's meant for people to no longer have, in some cases, a 3-hour round trip commute, et cetera. That can be some positives. But the good news in Shanghai, at least, is that it's we're really kind of back to normal business. The bad news for people like me, though, is that one of the consequences of that, or one of the behaviors that come from that, is that the authorities are extremely, extremely tough on anybody trying to return, which has been our issue. So I've continued to pay for an apartment for the last 6 months that I can't see. And it's extremely difficult to get back to China at this point. They will not allow people back without a fairly tough centralized quarantine and I can tell you some more horror stories about those experiences as well if people are interested.
Thanks, Brendan. And Simon, do you want to say a few words, introduce yourself?
All right, I think I'm unmuted now. Okay.
Yeah.
So my name is Simon Weintraub. I'm a partner in the Tel Aviv office at Yigal Arnon. I guess I'll speak a little bit more as to the Israel experience. So first of all, for those who are not familiar with our firm, we're one of the oldest, most well-known, one of the largest law firms in Israel. We have 2 offices in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. I'm based in the Tel Aviv office. I guess what I would say about Israel is that we were relative to the West. We were relatively quick to tackle COVID. So I think while other countries in the West were still trying to figure out what was going on and what to do, we shut borders very early, and we started putting rules into place. So much of March and April we were under a lockdown. Most of it wasn't a complete lockdown, meaning people were allowed to work or to go to offices, although there were rules set up in those offices in the beginning. You could only have 20% of your workforce, and the rules kind of changed over time such that you could have the full office come in, provided you followed certain rules and regulations. So, which is kind of where we're at today, meaning you have your temperature taken, everybody has to sign an undertaking regarding their health, and of course, wearing masks. With that said, so I would say come May, starting in May and certainly continuing on to June and onwards, people started going back to the office. Although, again, Israel's been hit by second waves, which has been pretty difficult the last month or so. Well, I would say that, I don't know where the date comes, but at some point where the offices were getting kind of back to normal, that has clearly taken a fall again. I would say, most of the lawyers in our firm today, by the way, we're about 220 lawyers and about 450 employees altogether. Lawyers, for the most part, I think are kind of splitting their times between home and the office. Personally, I go into the office about once, sometimes twice a week. Admin staff is actually is a little different. I would say admin staff really, for the most part, we haven't found as much a way for them to work from home, and they're primarily going to the office. And that's kind of where we're at this point.
Okay, thanks, I. Okay, so what I think is interesting about the pandemic is that even prior to it, we were seeing sort of fault lines along the traditional workplace structure. We were seeing those fault lines forming in the sense that there were question marks about whether people need or should be coming into the office as regularly. And the reasons for that were the prices of real estate, the increase in the size of law firms, price competition was becoming fiercer, and the fact that technology was allowing people to work more easily from home. And these trends were already beginning, in probably the 2 or 3 years even before, perhaps even longer, in some places, before COVID struck. So my question is to what extent, in your experiences, and I'll put this to each of you so everyone doesn't jump in. In your experiences, to what extent has COVID affected these changes, whether it's accelerated them, it's paused them, it's changed them? I'd be very interested to hear what you guys had to say. So let's start this time with Brendan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in terms of if your question is sort of how have we sort of changed our approach and how we sort of see things, is that sort of a fair summary of what you're looking for?
Yeah, and the extent to which, even before it started, your approach was changing, and whether if it wasn't, then obviously how it's changed, and if it already had started to change, what those changes were and how COVID's affected those.
Yeah, we were, and I was probably a big part of this. We were very resistant to kind of the broader changes of kind of the new world and the work-life balance, and we weren't having people ride their bicycles around in our office and bring their dogs, and and all these kind of alternative ways of people doing work, and we were probably comparatively traditional in terms of our we're on an 88 floor tower, so none of those things were realistic anyway. But we were very, very sort of traditional in sort of our approach, and we did have people, because of being a large city like Shanghai or Beijing. We did have people that had fairly substantial commutes in order to get to kind of the truly downtown area where we are. So I would say that we've probably been comparatively traditional in our approach, and expecting and feeling the need and the benefit of people being in the office. And I think that one of the consequences of what's happened is that we have certainly been forced to live with and rethink things. But one of the things I guess worth noting, and I don't mean to, Adrian, I hope I'm not jumping ahead on topics here, but it's kind of connected, is that I think some people have sort of looked at this and said, oh, well, I now believe that everybody can work remotely, and I can dramatically, decrease my footprint and my space needs. And I get the logic of why people might think that. But one of the things that we saw was during the 6 to 8 weeks where China really shut down hard, we actually didn't see a significant drop in efficiency. But part of the reason for that is that China didn't just shut down your ability to go to the office. They shut down your ability to do anything. Gyms were closed, restaurants were closed. Your ability to literally go outside was not, you weren't allowed to leave across the border of your door, with the exception of to go pick up food from the front desk type of deal. So what we found was that, where a lot of times people might resist the notion of kind of flexible work arrangements and people working from home, because basically people are going to, goof off or just not be as efficient or what have you. It's hard to sort of apply the classic scientific method to our situation, because in the case of China, everything else also was put on hold. So the temptations and the risks and the issues that you might typically sort of see with a flexible working arrangement, a lot of that was taken away, because really all you could do was work. So if we had like a young person, let's say for instance, that was young and single, that was working for us, and they're working from home, they literally had nothing else to do but us and some degree of online movies and whatever. And so we actually found that people were comparatively efficient, and of course they no longer had their commute. So now that we've gone through it, and hopefully we're not going to see wave 2, and sorry to hear that Israel has seen one. I don't, we didn't jump at the opportunity to say, this is great, let's dramatically reduce our space needs and have everybody work remotely. Now in Beijing, because we've had a bit more of this back and forth of, things being settled and then kind of having a bit of an issue, we've been a little bit more interested in that flexible approach. And so it's going to be interesting for us how we meld that together, because Beijing's had a little bit of a different experience than Shanghai. And so ultimately when Beijing kind of settles back out, and has gone to a little bit more of a flexible working arrangement, people in Shanghai are going to ask the question, can we do that? Does that make sense here? So we're going to have to synthesize all that, and I don't think we figured all that out quite just yet.
Okay, thanks. What about you guys, Adam?
So we had, at least at face value, we had a fairly progressive outlook in terms of flexible working. We ostensibly allowed people to work from home. It came to a bit of a head very parochially for me about probably 6 weeks before lockdown happened in mid-March, when my PA asked if she could work from home 1 day a week. And it was the first time a PA had ever asked such an incredible question. And it threw the HR team into uproar. How can we allow such a thing? And for various reasons, the answer came back, no, you can't work from home 1 day a week, only to then find that 3 weeks later, we sent everyone home to work from home. So that was quite an interesting insight. We also had a number of more senior partners who maybe had weekend homes or family homes that they would go to, and go maybe on a Thursday night and work there on a Friday at home, and then maybe come back into London on the Monday morning or something. So at the senior level, there was sort of flexibility. At the PA level, it seems there was none, despite the ostensible statement of we're great employers and we allow flexibility. We understand that not everyone's an automaton who can do 9 to 5 days, 5 days a week. And the associates, generally, if they asked, they would be allowed, but there was a sort of a bit of a frowning if they asked too much. And I never worked from home. I worked from home in the evenings, and I'd work from home at weekends. But during the working day, if I was working from home, and I always have to put the quotation marks around it, I'd get nothing done. I'd decrumb the toaster and descale the kettle, and I even cleaned the windows one day just to avoid doing anything during the working day, because office was for me.
It's great to hear you're such a handyman, Adam.
Those three things I can do. I think the issue, to come back to Brendan's comment about lawyers getting on with it and actually being able to do the work, is the sort of the terror of the private practice law firm of the 6-minute unit or the 10 or 15-minute unit. Doesn't matter what you measure in. Everyone is measured in a way that I suspect other industries are not so measured, and seeing output in that very pure input measured way might not work in other sectors. But I think for law firms that measure time, and you can say to people, we expect you to be doing 5, 6, 7 hours of recorded time a day if the work is there, you can see at the end of every day, have they closed their timesheets and did they have 5, 6 or 7 hours there? That, coupled with, as Brendan says, nothing else to do, and coupled with the fear of losing one's job because I'm the one who's not working, I think across the world in law firms meant that the law firms appeared in large part where there was work, and that's probably in sort of non-transactional areas, so advisory areas and contentious areas, we were incredibly busy. Transactional areas, much less so. People weren't buying and selling property. In fact, for a period of time, you weren't allowed to buy and sell property in the UK. You couldn't visit property to see it. You couldn't do any transactions, and corporate transactions also died down. So that sort of overall story means that I think we sort of have come through to wherever we are now. And I sort of mentioned earlier, not entirely clear where the UK is now. The UK has stopped publishing any figures at all of how many cases there are a day. We were having a 5 p.m. press release, press conference every day. All of that's gone. Figures have gone. We've no idea who's got it, who hasn't got it, how many people are dying. I think they're about to launch yet another measure of death. And I think having stopped announcing death rates, I think we're going to have 4 or 5 different death rates announced each day. And you can pick and choose whichever one suits your particular view of the world. But I think in terms of how's this going to impact on flexibility going forward, I think we've realized we can work from home. I think we've sort of accepted that works. Where we are, I think, all struggling, and I'll mention it because I'm sure we'll come on to it later, is sort of the social aspect of being in the office, the creativity, the working together that you just don't get. However good we are at seeing people in little boxes, I actually had a sort of half our team lives relatively close by in North London, and we met up this morning for a coffee in the park. I think the furthest anyone came was a half-hour cycle ride up a hill to join us, and 5 of us met in a park today. And actually seeing a human being in 3D who you're not married to or the parent of is quite remarkable, and not in a little box on your screen. So that social aspect and the teamwork and the creativity aspect, I think, is being challenged by not being in a single location. And we're still some distance, I think, in London from certainly all being back at work, like Simon described.
Right. Thanks, Adam. And I know you, Simon. You were on a committee at the firm before we entered into the COVID phase that was looking into sort of reforming work methods. So what was the sort of trends that you were identifying up to that point, and how have you seen things moving since COVID?
So I guess I kind of relate to some of the things that Brendan was saying early on regarding the traditional law firm, because I think we definitely fit into that model. On the other hand, I'm a little bit influenced by the fact that I personally do a lot of work actually in China, and at least pre-COVID I was traveling quite frequently to China, as Brendan can attest to. And one of the things I learned over there was, I started to see for the first time many law firms in China with these very flexible models and people sharing offices where nobody, nobody including partners have their own offices. I certainly had never seen that before, and this is something that I was seeing already years ago. I actually remember coming back. I took pictures. I came back. I showed our managing partner. He was like blown away, And he's like, oh, well, let's see what we can do here. And I was, I think, put on some kind of committee, and maybe we talked about it a little bit, but never really went anywhere. And coupled with that, I would say, in recent years, a lot of, primarily, I would say the junior associates, the new starting lawyers would typically ask, if they could work, maybe one day a week at home. All this is kind of interesting. I mean, as a tech lawyer, my clients are all tech companies in Israel. They've been like this for years. They know what flex hours are. They always sat on beanbags instead of, on chairs at desks. So it wasn't new to them, but, this was something so foreign to us. But clearly the world has changed. I mean, I can tell you for myself as well. I was one of these people, I had to work from the office. I really didn't know how to work from home for many reasons, maybe also having a young family. Now I can't imagine going back to the office the way I did ever again. I don't live in Tel Aviv, so I commute. And I just feel like I have so much more time in my life. I have more time in the morning. I have more time to work out. I've certainly spent more time with my family, even if it's just because they're all home and I can have lunch with them in the middle of a busy day. For me, that has tremendous value. And I don't really ever see, going back to something different. On the other hand, I think it's worth noting that I don't think, the others touched upon, but maybe we'll touch upon a bit. Well, I think for me, it's worked out really well. It's worked out for me well personally. I don't think it's affected my practice and the work I'm doing. I do think it's impacted what I would say the more junior levels of the firm. We have in Israel interns. We call them stagiaires, who have to do a year of internship before they write the exams. We have interns who started. They start twice a year. So we have interns who started on the 1st of March. Which it couldn't be any worse. I mean, that's just what was the height of everything. And, they're still not really up to speed where they should be. It's very difficult, and we really still haven't found the solutions yet to do the kind of training that we had. And when I say training, it isn't necessarily formal training. We still actually have formal training sessions on Zoom. We used to have lectures, so now the lectures are over Zoom. But I'm talking about the fact that people sat together. They could wander into someone's office, into a lawyer's office, a partner's office, talk to them, bounce ideas. That's really missing. I'm not really sure, how we get back to that. So those are my 2 cents.
So just to jump in on that, I think that on-the-job training and that sort of just picking up knowledge because you share a room with someone, or being in on a call without sort of the client feeling you've over-lawyered the call because there's a junior lawyer sitting there who they can't see. I think that's really missing, and I think that's going to be changing how we do things going forward as well, because we're not going to be doing phone calls. We're going to be doing video calls like this with our clients, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to impact on that sort of absorption of knowledge that you just get as a junior lawyer sitting next to someone who's been doing it for 15, 20, 30 years. You can have all the formal training, but it is that informal stuff I think is really, really challenging. Yeah,
no, it's a really good point. I mean, I'm on Zoom, I'm sure you are, all day. And the interesting thing is that, I now attend so many board meetings over Zoom, and I never did before. Mostly, it was rare that I went physically to a board meeting, usually over the telephone. And as you said, often, the lawyers who worked with me, the associates, the interns, they would dial in, they would listen. It was great training. I don't feel comfortable doing that today. It's just not comfortable to have another box pop up on the screen in the middle of a board meeting. It just doesn't work.
Correct. So it's got all the advantages, but I think there is that big disadvantage of sort of surprisingly of visibility, where you can have someone invisibly learning, but can't be done now.
Fly on the wall.
So this is interesting in the sense that what we've all been talking about, the changes that have happened with our working days and our working practices, and touched a little bit on some of the disadvantages, and we can go into that a little bit later. But what's interesting to me here is it sounds like we're still in the middle of this process, and no one, at least I'm not hearing here, and correct me if I'm wrong, that law firms have sort of taken a longer term view on how to make more efficient, if necessary, working practices going forward, on the assumption that things are going to remain like this for a relatively long period of time. Do any of you guys see that people are starting to think about putting systems in place that will create, for instance, a better training environment for trainees, or how to staff deals, or how to, you know, experience more the sort of three-dimensional, you know, meetings with colleagues on a regularly irregular basis? Have any of you come across anyone in your firm or other firms for that matter where people have started to think about, you know, the new norm in a more formalized manner? I throw that out to anybody who feels like answering.
Well, maybe I'll just take a quick stab at it. I mean, I would say that just by way of comparison, you know, I've seen a lot of schools and other organizations that have invested in a lot of additional technology that they normally would not have used historically, in terms of the ability to more actively video conference and share, for example, a classroom environment with the students that are unable to be in there. Now, we were, you know, like, to pat ourselves on the back, I thought we actually did a comparatively good, I thought, you know, before this, I thought we did a comparatively good job using video capabilities. And part of the reason we did was because of the way our firm manages ourselves in terms of kind of business units and things. And our business unit, in terms of from an internal management perspective, extends across mainland China, Hong Kong, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Myanmar. And so we need to have the ability amongst those offices in particular, and also with other offices in Baker, but we need to have a fairly seamless ability to have a lot of internal meetings and management, because we may have, you know, for that unit, we may have a managing partner that's in one office, and we may have the person that's looking after another issue in another. So there's just a whole lot of, even beyond the client stuff, a lot of internal meetings that happen. So we have, you know, fairly nice size, you know, kind of video conference, you know, kind of cameras that are up, and big screens in sort of various rooms. So that, I think we did a relatively decent job on. But of course, I don't think any of us, I think my iPhone, for example, I think is kind of dying. And my theory is that I don't think the iPhone was designed to take constant Zoom calls all day. You know, I just don't think that. I think part of the reason my phone's maybe having issues is I think it's just getting stressed out in a way that it wasn't designed to, wasn't expected to be used at this pace. So I think, yeah, I think, I guess for us, I mean, I you know, I personally, and maybe this is just my own personal view of it, I still have to admit that I kind of, unlike Simon, I'm kind of sticking my head in the sand on this one, because this hasn't been what I've wanted it to be. You know, I haven't really benefited in the sense that, yeah, I'm getting time with my family, but I'm also none of us are able to get back to what we had considered home. I don't know if we consider it home anymore, honestly. It's hard to consider a place home that won't let you back. You know, that's kind of hard to kind of put your brain around that. But so I don't think we've majorly changed, you know, kind of the dynamics of how we do work, partially again because of the fact that China has come back to some level of normalcy, and so we haven't been forced to do that because there was this hard shutdown, and we had to kind of deal with it for maybe, you know, 6 weeks to 2 months. And then people, you know, we're able to go back to it. In the US, I think people quite understandably are asking the question, how long is this going to go? And you're seeing things like, you know, Google's announced that everybody's working from home until July. And I expect more and more tech businesses will do those types of things. So I think that for us, I think that while there's a recognition that perhaps there's a real estate play here, an opportunity to downsize, I think there's enough anxiety around, you know, how do we really change the business model of practicing as a law firm and expect it to work? Because I think a lot of those points about training, camaraderie, junior people, and honestly, for me, I mean, we've talked a lot about this, and maybe we'll come to this a little bit later, but I you know, the way I develop clients is I spend time with them. Like, I travel a ton, so similar to some of the comments Simon made about travel. I'm used to working virtually. So in some regards, I have been built for this. Like, this is not weird for me. I mean, I worked from hotel rooms. I mean, I'm quite used to doing a lot of this and having extended business trips to, you know, and being in the US, but in other places. But the fact that I can't go see clients and do that all anymore, I think there's just a part of me and a part of a number of us that are like, look, we'll just put whatever Band-Aids we need to put on for the period of time that we need to. And we're just hoping it gets back to some level of normal, whatever that might mean. And so I think to some extent, if we started buying a lot more video equipment and we started having, you know, people with other devices and stuff so that they could work more virtually, that would be a recognition and an acceptance that this is not, that somebody's not going to come up with a vaccine over the next 2 months and just make all this go away and make it a bad memory. And I think a lot of us just want it to be a bad memory, you know, and so we don't want to admit to it and take it full on by making changes in how we do things. That's kind of where my head is.
So the travel thing I find interesting, in that I used to do a fair amount of travel. I'm sort of lucky being in London that everyone comes through London, so I don't need to travel out quite as much as people in many other cities. But I do find I'll organize a call for, say, me and 2 of my colleagues with 3 lawyers from another law firm. Now, in the real world, as I'll still think of it, you'd meet together in a meeting room and you'd have 3 bilateral conversations going on after a little while. You'd have a sort of round table thing, and then it would just sort of naturally split up into the 2 corporate people would speak, the 2 litigators speak, the 2 tech people would speak, or whatever. You can't do that in Zoom. So whoever's speaking monopolizes the conversation. The other 5 are sort of sitting there watching and listening, but they can't all jump in at the same time. And I think how we therefore manage our time and our relationships is inevitably changing, because I think it's going to take, even with vaccines, I think it's going to take a while for us to get back into that sort of routine of sort of, I've got a fantastic coffee lounge area in my office that people sort of, you walk around, you hear sort of half a dozen plus languages being spoken. There's people from all over the place. They're just not going to be coming through London for about another year to 2 years, by which time they might have forgotten how to do it. And it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with that sort of thing, so clients, lawyers, whatever. So it's not just at the junior level, but it's sort of throughout, I think, challenging the way we do what we always used to just sort of take as a given. I think is going to be interesting to see how that lands.
I just wanted to add that I suspect that there's a big shift going on in law firms regarding shifting of costs, and I'll explain what's going on in our law firm. Clearly, we are shifting. I mean, the budget, whatever budget we had for the year, is pretty much the same, but there is a shifting, you know, between line items, in the sense that we're moving much more money into, you know, let's say, you know, technology and computer and support and those kind of issues, and a lot less money is being spent on marketing for obvious reasons. We're not flying people around the world to different things. And I suspect that this is a trend that's really going to continue, whereas that firms are going to invest more and more heavily in, you know, getting back to also what Brendan was talking about before, into technological solutions. But by the way, even beyond technological solutions, I mean, I could tell you, at least at our firm, when we were first, you know, locked down, we had a lot of trouble initially with, you know, all these people working on VPN remotely. We didn't have enough licenses in the beginning. We weren't ready for this. That's kind of the Band-Aid approach, and you know, we slowly started fixing those issues. But there's a lot of money being poured into our infrastructure right now, to make sure that we will work seamlessly at home. You know, we were not ready for that, and that is going to improve. And as for, you know, marketing has to change. I can just tell you an idea. I'm happy to throw out and share with you guys. I had a marketing idea which I haven't used yet. You know, as I said earlier, I used to travel, you know, regularly to China. But I was thinking, well, I should do that.
I'm sure you want to divulge this, Simon.
That's okay. I'm willing to share it with my colleagues. I was thinking, you know, I should just do a trip to China in a couple of weeks. It wouldn't be a physical trip, but why don't I take a week out of my schedule and do what I usually do? And I'm going to have back-to-back Zoom meetings all day, as difficult as it sounds, obviously, to all of us. But I just think we need to rethink about how we approach these things. And my guess is, is it perfect? Is it as good as, you know, going out to dinner with people in China? Probably not. But I do think there would be value to do a virtual trip like that.
I've sort of done something not hugely dissimilar. I have taken out the odd morning, and I sort of had meeting after meeting in that way. But yeah, take out a whole week. I'm sort of conscious that the IBA is not happening this year. First week in November, I should be in Miami having sort of 50 meetings or whatever in 4 days or whatever it is. I don't think I'm going to set aside that week to have 50 meetings in 4 days.
So this is an interesting, you know, a question is are there advantages to what we're going through now? Are there ways that we can, that this will help us to improve our practice? So on the one hand, we have Simon saying that, you know, it could possibly be that a trip, you know, a virtual trip to China may actually, you know, enables people to access more people, you know, than they would in a real trip to China. On the other hand, you know, maybe it's just too tiring for it to work. So that's one question. Have you guys seen any other advantages other than obviously spending more time with family and more sort of self-time? But have you guys found any advantages to the current, working practices as they've been imposed on us?
I'll jump in very quickly with one thing. We instituted across the firm a process of trying to ring 3 clients a day or 3 contacts a day, and sort of had a table of winners and losers of who was actually doing their 3 calls a day. And that went on for probably 2 or 3 months. And it was very powerful in terms of having sort of 450, 500, probably 400 odd lawyers actually trying to ring 2 or 3 people every day just to sort of say, hello, how are you? What's it like wherever you are? What's going on? It slowed down because I think people sort of had heard enough from Mishcon contacts of theirs. But it was quite an impressive process that lasted for a period of time. Whether you can keep that going
these
in
were
the same
existing
way.
clients, Adam? Or
Yeah, a mix. So generally existing people who you were sort of who you had worked with and didn't have current work on with, and lawyers around the place as well. So it was a really impressive project that some really got into in a very competitive way. But it's not dissimilar to Simon's. I'm going to go to wherever for the next week. I'll go to China, I'll go to Japan, I'll go to South Korea, whatever it is that he's going to do. It's sort of a similar theme. Interesting approach.
Is it better? Do you think
it's different? I don't know if it's better or not. I think it's different. I think for some people, the last thing they want to do is hear from some lawyer who they think isn't phoning them up for anything other than more work. But maybe that's no different to me phoning up someone in China and saying, I'm going to be in Beijing next week. Can I come and see you? And they think, oh no, not him again. I don't know.
Anybody else? Any thoughts on how this may have improved their work generation, work efficiency?
So I'll just one other thing that I was going to say is actually seeing people through this sort of technology in a way that I didn't used to. I used to do phone calls, and I used to shy away from video calls, and I'm not sure why. I think we were frightened they could see into my office and see secret papers or something using Skype. Whereas now the idea of doing anything other than a video call seems odd.
Right.
Really
I can testify to the fact that I did a marketing meeting with someone. I think it was with Simon actually. We did a marketing meeting, and the guy was eating his breakfast. He was literally making and eating his breakfast in front of us.
That's a bit off-putting.
Well, but actually it created a sort of intimacy. He ate very cleanly, so fortunately.
That's okay.
He kept his mouth closed when he ate. He chewed. But it created a sort of intimacy that I think we would never have had we just picked up the phone and chatted to him to hear.
No, absolutely. Sort of the thing I had in mind was I have seen clients who I've never seen before. I've seen people. I've been dealing with some people for maybe 4, 5, 6 years and never met them, never seen them. You do email exchanges, you do phone calls. Actually seeing them, and sometimes seeing them in their home makes it even more. I feel as if I know them now.
That was exactly the point I wanted to make as well. Leaving marketing aside, I feel it's improved my relationship with clients, with some of my clients. Those clients who I never ever saw, we see each other all the time now. And exactly as you pointed out, I see them intimately. Their kids are running by. It's just a totally different dynamic.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe I'm in a different situation than you guys. It sounds like I travel way more than any of you do, probably, and that's probably what it is that. So for me, it's been definitely, in my view, it's been negative because I actually have met literally in person almost every client I've ever had. So it's just, I go through absolutely brutal trips to the US over a 2-week period where I'll be in one city every day. And so, there probably are some clients over time, or that it takes a little bit longer that I get to that point where I get to meet them in person and see them. And I agree, it's always been phone calls if it hasn't been an in-person meeting. People have not typically done a lot of Skypes and things. And it's funny, a lot of times when people use Skype and then and I'm kind of going, okay, I need to be wearing a suit for this particular Skype call. And then I get on and everybody has it on, the video's off. And so they just use Skype as basically a phone call that was less expensive. And I like, can you let me know this in advance? Would have been helpful. But for me, it definitely, it's a challenge, because a lot of what I think a lot of clients, it's interesting what Adam was saying, because I think clients for me, they got to the point where like, they just didn't want any more phone calls. And part of it was, I think it was a mix of things, but it was one of the things is that I don't think people mind phone calls in normal times, but in these times, there's nothing else to talk about. Like finally in the US, we're starting to see some sports come back, but there's no way to have a conversation. My wife figured out the one topic I felt like you could actually come talk about, which was cooking. I was like, but there's a lot of like, what's going on in the world? COVID. What's going on at work? COVID.
For us
everything.
in the UK, it was fantastic. We could avoid mentioning Brexit.
Yeah. But, like you talk about, but typically you would talk about travel and vacations and things, and you couldn't do any of that. So for me, but before even all of that, one of the big things for me was the fact that I am some of my other colleagues in Asia Pacific, those of us that are very active on the client side, the fact that we travel as much as we do, it really opened a lot of doors. Because if you said to a client in New York City, and New Yorkers are, I lived in New York for a number of years, New Yorkers are sort of known quite well for, not really having interest in anybody coming to visit them, because they just sort of like, well, everybody's going to come anyway. But if you come from China, your ability to get that meeting and not have them cancel on you versus setting up a Zoom call is pretty different. And so I feel like part of it is just that, I agree with, the dinner, of course, is a lot of times more powerful, but it's also just the fact that you come all that way and you open some doors, as opposed to as opposed to if it's just a video call, like it's people feel a lot more comfortable just kind of pulling the plug on things. I'm laughing at Adrian because we're getting the experience of your son.
I just thought that.
It's a great example of what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, but like I think
my world of working from home.
But I think the challenge for me is that I think my 25 plus years of doing this or thereabouts is that a lot of what we've been able to do is make personal connections. And to some extent, I think, like, I'm not sure that I'm smarter than anybody else. I think sometimes it's just I'm willing to get on more planes than anybody else. And that's no longer a differentiator because as Adam said, everybody can pick up the phone. But I think a lot of my clients over like the first couple of months that I was in the States, I felt like I was making similar to Adam's sort of target. I was trying to, call a certain number of people each day or each week. But I think people are they're kind of tired. They're kind of tired of talking. They're just like, look, I've been on so many darn Zoom calls. The last thing I want is another one of these.
Right. I mean, in terms of, we're sort of coming to the end of our allotted time here. I'm going to ask a sort of the $64,000 question, I suppose, which is, do you guys think that this is going to change the bottom line? So let's change that, because we don't know what's going to happen to the world economy. Assuming that the trends in the world economy continue the way they are now, do we think that the pandemic is going to affect this year's bottom line? Let's ask Adam.
Yeah, I think it will. I think it will affect this year's bottom line. I think revenues will be down. I think costs will be down. Sort of, it's not just Brendan, Simon, and my flights, but so if I look at my so we don't use corporate credit cards, we use personal credit cards and then expense stuff. And I've realized my credit card bill is so down because I'm not doing 3 or 4 breakfasts and 3 or 4 lunches a week with clients and contacts. So I think the expenses are down. I think there will be. Interestingly, we have recruited during this period, and we've recruited people who we've never met in person. But I think typically people who leave the firm won't be replaced immediately in the normal way. But I think overall profits will probably be down. I think revenues will be down. It depends on the balance of the firm as well. Sort of as a sort of we're sort of heavy in litigation and private wealth and planning and that sort of areas. I think they're very busy. But I think firms and I can only really talk about London, but firms in London who are really big in real estate are going to have a serious collapse in their income level. But the overall bottom line, the net profit of the firm, I think inevitably will be down. And I think it's going to be slightly awkward if it's not. I think it's going to look a bit embarrassing for firms who've had to make cuts and firms who've sort of pleaded poverty and whatever, and not done pay reviews and things to then find their profits have gone up as a result. I think that might be embarrassing if people can remember when the accounts are published in a year's time of last year. That would be odd.
Right, interesting. Brendan, about the a multinational corporation, you know, like Baker McKenzie, how do you think that will pan out globally?
Look, I mean, I don't see how it can be anything but tough. I mean, I agree that to some extent some costs will be down, but I mean the top line and the business side. Look, I think in most firms, I mean, there's some sort of discrete boutique firms that have a very unique practice, but even though we have this incredibly diverse practice where we have dedicated employment lawyers, I'm a dedicated tax lawyer, we have dedicated banking lawyers, on and on and on. I mean, the reality is that the best of the years are when we're doing large capital markets transactions and large M&A deals. And all of that activity, I think, is comparatively on the slower side, at least from what I've seen everything globally. So that's inherent, that while everything's sort of parked on the sidelines. And so the likelihood that we're going to have this magical last 4 to 5 months of the year as a vaccine comes out, it seems unlikely. And so I feel like my attitude, and when I talk to some of my colleagues over in Asia, my attitude on some of this is just that we need to weather the storm. And that is, at least certainly during the calendar 2020, and you focus on being smart and sharp during that time. And I don't mean necessarily draconian and mean towards people, but more just not being wasteful, being efficient, being focused. And then I think it's really important that we also, on the cost side management, to try to just make sure we keep all of the really good, talented people that we have. So I think the advisory practices, especially, of course, disputes and bankruptcy, et cetera, are going to be on the busier side. But I seriously doubt that would be enough to counterbalance kind of what is typically the larger teams and the bigger ticket of M&A and capital markets. And so I expect 2020 will definitely be very hard. I think at the same time, what we all have to recognize is that we've had, at least certainly over in Asia, we've had a heck of a decade run, since the last, global financial crisis. And so if we get a course correction for a year, we should consider ourselves very, very fortunate if we come to some level of equilibrium, comfort, and an ability to move forward by the beginning of 2021. I mean, that's kind of my hope, is that we can just kind of get through this as a team, as a almost as a family, honestly, at least with respect to my team and my practice, and then hope we can come out, come in the beginning of 2021 and be ready to kind of attack things in a good way.
Right. Well, what about you, Si?
So, I mean, maybe we're in a slightly different position, as we're not a large international law firm, or we're an Israeli, relatively small law firm by global standards. So I think to some extent we've always been lean and mean, and we'll continue to be lean and mean. I think as for 2020, honestly, we're probably doing a lot better than we thought we would. There are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that, tech is still, very, very strong. That also could be COVID related, but tech is very strong and continues to bolster us. But I worry, I have a much more long-term worry, because I don't think we're going to have a cure anytime soon. I think this is something that it could take us years to recover. And it could very well be that, Israel's just, we just haven't felt yet the effects of the overall worldwide slowdown. When the tech giants really slow down, Israel will feel that. So where I'm personally less concerned for 2020, I am worried for 2021.
Okay.
It's a cheerful thought.
I was going to say, on those optimistic words, I haven't seen any questions coming in from the audience. Last seconds ticking down, if you're interested. But in the absence of that, I just first of all like to thank Adam and Brendan and Simon for letting us hear their thoughts on these unusual times. And if anybody here has learned something, whether the panelists or the audience have learned anything from hearing about the experiences spoken about here, or has thought about issues they hadn't thought about before, then I think this has been not just interesting, but also hopefully a learning experience for those participating. So thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully the next one of these will be in person.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Be safe, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.